protecting the unborn. Republican Senator Mike Braun from Indiana tells us about his new pro-life proposal. Immigration reform, what you should know about the Democrats' new plan. Catholics in China. Questions surface after the communist country issues a new decree on appointing bishops. And winter worries, how some Catholics are helping their neighbors weather the storm. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, February 18th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden called for immigration reform, and now Democrats on Capitol Hill are unveiling a major immigration overhaul. Plus, Vice President Kamala Harris promotes ways the American Rescue Plan can help women bounce back from the coronavirus pandemic. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports.
Vice President Kamala Harris arriving this morning at the White House, ready to talk about the American Rescue Plan. Her audience, women who are lawmakers and leaders from around the nation. The vice president said in just 1 year, decades of progress have been put at risk.
First, job loss. About 2.5 million women have dropped out or have been forced out of the workforce during the pandemic.
Flip the calendar back to just 12 months ago.
Last February, around 5 million women were business owners, and 2 months later, by April, 1 in 4 had closed their doors.
The vice president asked for their help to make the American Rescue Plan a reality, saying it will provide
$1,400 checks to those who need it, and at least $3,000 in tax credits to parents for each of their children.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden's proposed immigration overhaul, a pathway to citizenship for millions of people already here without legal status, unveiled on Capitol Hill.
I salute the president for putting forth the legislation that he did.
But with no enhanced border security, a must for Republicans, and a divided Congress, the proposal may not pass. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters by phone today the president's U.S. Citizenship Act means that America remains a refuge for those fleeing persecution.
We expect elected officials from both sides of the aisle to come to the table so we can finally get this done.
Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Indiana Senator Mike Braun is reintroducing a bill called Dignity for Aborted Children Act. The bill enforces guidelines for the dignified handling of aborted baby remains, or penalties could be handed down for failing to respect the sanctity of life. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
In the time that I'm here, always push for profiling the sanctity of life.
Indiana's Republican Senator Mike Braun tells me he knows it's going to be an uphill battle to get his Dignity for Aborted Children Act passed, but it's needed.
You should treat the remains with the same respect as you would any remains, and that the mother and the parents should be the ones that have the discretion to do that, and that you do not have someone else dictate the process.
In 2019, the senator first tried to get the bill passed, but it failed. It came about after the disturbing discovery of some 2,200 aborted babies found in the home of Ulrich Kloffer, a former South Bend, Indiana abortion doctor who had died. Senator Braun's bill requires abortion providers dispose of the remains of unborn children just as any other human being. Failure to do so is punishable with a fine and up to 5 years in prison. It would also require a consent form so the mother can choose to retain or intern the unborn child. Pro-life organizations like Family Research Council support it and say speaking for the unborn must happen.
Truly show America that while abortion may remain legal in the United States because of Roe v. Wade currently, we're going to continue to fight for unborn lives and just show American people the true value of unborn life.
The bottom line, Senator Braun tells me, it's about protecting and fighting for the sanctity of human life. Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Power has been restored in parts of Texas following crippling winter storms. Still, hundreds of thousands remain without electricity, and many don't even have access to safe drinking water. Correspondent Mark Irons tells us how Catholics in Texas are responding to those most in need.
We have a lot of homeless people.
In frozen Texas, Catholics are providing for people on the streets.
Antonio Fernandez, the CEO of Catholic Charities in San Antonio, says clothes, diapers, food, water, blankets, and coffee are being distributed.
This is what Jesus asked all of us to do, is to go out to the streets and serve them and treat them like anyone would like to be treated, like we would treat Jesus Christ. So this is our priority, our mission, and we are blessed to do this.
In Temple, Texas, outside Austin, St. Mary's Parish is using its extra space to care for victims of the winter weather.
I just looked out on my campus and I said at this big building, and it's doing nothing but consuming heat and electricity.
Father Curtis Wiedenfeld opened the church doors. He says it's one of the ways to live the gospel.
Going out and clothing and feeding the hungry and giving drink to the thirsty and shelter to those in need. That was always something that should be primary in our parish.
In Texas, just under 500,000 homes and businesses remained without power, down from about 3 million on Wednesday. The mayor of Austin says the state was unprepared.
Our power system wasn't hardened to be able to take the really low temperatures. That's not the kind of event we're not going to see. We have to anticipate that.
And more than 320,000 homes and businesses were without power in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama as storms dumped as much as 4 inches of snow and ice across the region. The church continues to serve.
This is our job and our responsibilities.
In Washington, Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
People take to the streets to protest the military coup in Myanmar. Chanting, "We don't accept military coup," demonstrators gathered in Mandalay, the country's second largest city. Tension has been growing since the military took over on February 1st. Video showing a dramatic volcanic eruption in Sicily, lava shooting out of Mount Etna and sending ashes high into the sky. The eruption, the second one this month, forced the temporary closure of Sicily's Catania airport. There are no reports of injuries or deaths. Well, China announces new rules on the appointment of bishops without mentioning the Vatican-China deal. Starting May 1st, China's state-run Catholic Church, together with the Bishops' Conference, will select, approve, and ordain clergy. The rules do not mention the Vatican-China deal that was renewed last October. Joining us now with more insight is Colm Flynn, EWTN News Rome correspondent. Colm, good to see you. So tell us, what are these new rules for appointing bishops?
Good evening, Tracy. Well, China released a document entitled Administrative Measures for Religious Clergy, which states that the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association, which is the state-run church, will be responsible for selecting future clergy. Now, those candidates will then be approved and consecrated by the Chinese Catholic Bishops' Conference. But there is no mention of the Vatican approving bishops, despite the Vatican-China deal involving both the Chinese authorities and the Holy See in the process of appointing bishops. Now, the document details the process of selecting clergy in China. The rules state that once the clergy member is selected and approved, the information is sent to the Chinese State Administration for Religious Affairs to be registered in a database. Once registered, clergy are required to promote the values of the Communist Party, to love and support the motherland, and to guide citizens to be patriotic and abide by the laws. Now, under the state administration, clergy are not permitted to host events outside of religious places without prior authorization.
Colm, do we know why the Vatican-China deal wasn't mentioned in the new rules?
Well, Tracy, it's hard to say. The Vatican-China deal was renewed last October as an extension of a 2018 provisional agreement. And since the renewal, 3 bishops have been appointed under the agreement. However, the terms of the deal have never been made public. We knew very little about the process until this recent document, which seems to shed some light on it. Now, EWTN News contacted the Holy See press office, and they told us that the Vatican-China deal is considered private. But perhaps the reason for the Vatican and the Vatican-China deal not being mentioned in this official document from China is because by law there can be no public recognition of a foreign power in China. Now, some Chinese clergy have reported has been saying that it doesn't interfere with the Vatican-China deal, this recent document, because the Chinese Catholic Bishops' Conference has to get the stamp of approval from the Vatican in order to proceed. So basically, no Vatican approval, no new clergy. That's in theory, at least.
So, Colm, quickly before I let you go, where exactly does this put the Catholic Church in China?
Well, Tracy, all of this really doesn't change the status of the Catholic Church in China. We contacted Father Bernardo Cervella, who is an expert in the church in China, and he said that the rules have been in place for years, but with the release of this document, it indicates that the protocol is becoming more official and reinforced. He did tell us, though, that after talking to some priests he knows in China, they're being limited in their pastoral care because they have to attend Chinese state-run meetings and training seminars about how to enforce the teachings of the Communist Party, which gives them little time to serve their flock. Tracy?
Colm Flynn, EWTN Newsroom correspondent. Thank you so much, Colm.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, vaccine mandate, the pressure facing employees at the Vatican City State, and COVID-19 relief. A hard-hit Latin American country makes plans to inoculate 1 million people. We are following a developing story in South Carolina where the governor just signed a pro-life bill into law. The measure bans most abortions after the unborn baby's heartbeat is detected. However, the law will have to wait. That's because Planned Parenthood immediately sued to stop the law from taking effect. Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, host Catherine Hadro takes a moment to look back and forward on the mission of the show as it celebrates its 200th episode.
All is not lost, and this is not, a time to be, down. It's a time to push forward. It's a time to be even more vocal and even stronger and more strident in our fight for life.
EWTN Chairman and CEO Michael Warsaw joins President of the Susan B. Anthony List, Marjorie Dannenfelser, to discuss the future of the pro-life movement. That is tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly at 10 p.m. Eastern. And we have an update now on the status of the USCCB's special working group formed to address the, quote, unique circumstance posed by President Joe Biden's public positions in opposition to church teaching. Reports published earlier this week indicated that the working group was, quote, disbanded just 3 months after it was formed in November following the presidential election. Matt Hadro, senior DC correspondent for Catholic News Agency, has been reporting on this story, and he joins me now on Skype. Matt, thanks so much for being here. I know that you've been closely following these developments, but first off, remind us why this working group was created in the first place.
So the working group was created in November after the presidential election. President of the conference, Archbishop Jose Gomez, said that the election of Joe Biden as just the second Catholic president in U.S. history really presented a unique circumstance, particularly that Biden professes to be a devout Catholic, and yet he has taken stances in contradiction to the church's teachings on life. And so Gomez said that the working group was necessary to help sort out the complexity of some of these issues.
Matt, what are your sources telling you about its status now?
So, a source close to the proceedings said that it's not quite accurate to say that it was disbanded this week because that the working group had really, for all intents and purposes, had accomplished the mission that it was charged with to make some recommendations to the conference about how to deal with the incoming administration.
And Matt, what do we know about those recommendations?
So the recommendations were largely twofold. One was that Archbishop Gomez should send an open letter to President Biden upon his, around his inauguration. And we saw this with Gomez's statement on behalf of the conference that was, where he said the bishops are meant to be pastors and not partisan players, and that they have to speak, they have to form consciences. And he outlined areas where the Biden administration was proposing policies that agreed with the church, and then other areas where the administration was acting in contradiction with the church on issues of life and marriage, for instance. And the second recommendation had to do with, recommending that the conference issue a teaching document on Eucharistic coherence later in the year.
Matt, I want to talk a little bit about the USCCB's focus on what they're calling, quote, Eucharistic coherence. What is that, and how does it intersect with the recommendations pertaining to President Biden?
So Eucharistic coherence is a term we've seen used by bishops in the Vatican before, and it refers to just kind of the integrity that a Christian's life should have, that if one is to receive Holy Communion, they shouldn't be acting against the commandments, particularly on grave issues of abortion, euthanasia, marriage. And so this, the working group recommended that first that, the bishops need to be talking about, Catholic politicians who are acting against the church's teaching in the public square, that there need to be avenues for bishops to have conversations with them, and that the bishops should be clear also about what canon law teaches about possible denial of Holy Communion to someone who is acting against church teaching in public and is obstinately refusing to repent of their position. But one other thing that we've seen bishops saying is that this particular matter needs to be framed in the broader perspective of worthiness to receive Holy Communion. And they've been saying that Catholics really need to recover a sense of worthiness to receive communion, that one shouldn't be conscious of mortal sin when they approach for Holy Communion. And so this is something that we might really be seeing different committees at the conference be talking about in future months.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us today. We appreciate it. Well, the Vatican says employees who refuse a coronavirus vaccine may lose their jobs. The cardinal who heads the Vatican city-state issued a decree requiring employees to receive a vaccine if it is deemed necessary for their work. Those who refuse may be transferred to a different job or even fired. In 2011, the Holy See began allowing employees to lose their positions for refusing health checks. People in Peru express anger over the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. They say politicians were given the shots before healthcare workers. The ambassador of the Holy See in Peru is among those accused of getting the COVID vaccine before others. The Archbishop of Lima calls the decision a mistake. 2 top cabinet members and 2 vice ministers have already resigned over the controversy. Colombia has begun its vaccine program. The country has the second worst COVID outbreak in Latin America. Officials hope to vaccinate up to 1 million people in the next 4 weeks. The shots are free of charge. Up next, ethical dilemma. How in vitro fertilization is up for debate overseas. Officials in the Serbian Orthodox Church are gathering to pick their new leader. The meetings are taking place at St. Sava Cathedral in Belgrade. The former leader died last November from the coronavirus. Patriarch Irene was 90 years old. The country is roughly 85% Catholic. The Russian Orthodox Church is re-examining its stance on in vitro fertilization reproductive technology in light of medical advances. A draft of the proposed document was published earlier this month on the official site of the Russian Church. Comments are being collected by the Intercouncil Presence of the Russian Church until March 29th. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Dr. Joseph Meaney, president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Dr. Meaney, welcome back. Always great to speak with you. Reports indicate the Russian Orthodox Church is initiating this discussion in light of the medical advances surrounding in vitro fertilization, also known as IVF, in the past 20 years. What have some of the major ethical concerns been?
Right. So the Orthodox Church has a very similar teaching to the Catholic Church, and they have opposed in vitro fertilization for the main reasons that the Catholic Church does as well, that it's not respectful of the lives of these children, that they're treated as objects, created in laboratories, et cetera. But it seems like there's a proposal from some people to say, well, you could do IVF in some kind of morally licit way that didn't put too many embryos at risk of being killed. And so they're thinking about changing their position, but it would be a shame if they did.
And how have those concerns been addressed by advancements in science? What does this draft document indicate?
Yeah, so they don't really go into much detail as to what scientifically has changed. And in fact, I believe that the way in vitro fertilization works is pretty much the same. The question is whether it could be done in such a way that there weren't spare embryos being produced, that it was done in such a way that there weren't any fetal reductions where they kill embryos if there are more than one that implants in the womb of the mother. If there's no pre-implantation genetic diagnosis and the killing of embryos that may have genetic conditions, all those are very good objections to have, and the Orthodox Church brings those up. But does it really respect the dignity of the human person to be conceived in a laboratory rather than in a family? And there are many Orthodox who don't believe that is acceptable in any case. So that's why there's a debate within the Orthodox Church.
Yeah, another question I have is, what hasn't changed in terms of the Russian Orthodox Church's position?
Right. So they're very strongly behind, life begins at conception and has to be defended. So, the position on abortion is 100% strong. And also with regards to in vitro fertilization, that they would say, any procedure in IVF that treats a conceived human embryo as an object, to be discarded or killed is completely unacceptable to them. Really, the crux of the issue is, is it dignified or not? Is it acceptable or not to be conceived in a laboratory, even if all those that are conceived are immediately implanted in the mother?
And in your opinion, what other factors are really playing into the timing of this discussion?
Well, one of the things that has to really be weighing on the Russians right now is their demographic problems. They have such a low birth rate, population decreasing, et cetera. And I think there's a lot of political pressure that's going into place to say, look, we need to raise the birth rate. Why can't we accept some form of in vitro fertilization from the church, the Orthodox Church? And of course, it's a political pressure, not really a theological. I think they need to be focusing more on the dignity of the human person as they are conceived. Should it be by the loving embrace of the father and the mother, or by a lab tech? And what is truly right? And I think the Orthodox Church knows the answer to that. That's why so many within that church do not want IVF under any circumstances. But there are some that I think are tempted by other considerations, such as the political situation, the demographic situation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do we know yet, what kind of reaction this is generating there?
Yeah, certainly there are many, many Orthodox leaders and many Orthodox pro-life leaders who say, look, if you accept this, IVF under very limited circumstances, you have already kind of opened a door, and there's nothing that's going to stop it from growing. When the Anglicans accepted contraception under very, very limited conditions in 1930, it just blew out to where contraception was accepted under all circumstances. So again, it's very dangerous, to give up the principle that the human person should be conceived by their parents and not by a third party.
Well, Dr. Meaney, thank you so much for coming on, for your time and your analysis. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.